Yeah. Evening, everyone. Hello, welcome. It's a lovely evening, isn't it? And all you good folk have chosen to be here, which is nice. You could be out enjoying the sunshine, but you've made the right decision. We've got a great lineup for you tonight, a double bill. UX is a broad church, and our speakers tonight have both had kind of former professional lives in kind of other disciplines that have kind of shaped their approach to UX, and really looking forward to hearing about their experiences around that. Going to keep it pretty brief. The intro's pretty brief because we've got a lot of good stuff to get through. Just my usual thanks to our hosts, Oren and Sean at Codebase. Thanks again to Alan, who is basically communicating the message of UX Edinburgh to the masses via the power of live stream once again. Thanks, Alan. And finally, a big thanks to our speakers, Kerry and Val tonight. So we'll get straight on with the show, but just before that, we've got an announcement from Michael. I'll just hand you over to Michael.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Some of you have got this flyer already. This was an event that sort of started to take shape back in 2019, when we, or even before that, but then we went to Northern UX, which Vimla spoke at, and you can find on the ticket tailor, you can find her video. Highly recommend you watch that. It's not just one of the best UX talks, it's one of the best talks I've ever seen, period, and that's including all of the TED Talks, and I've watched a lot of them. So the reason I wanted to ensure that UX Edinburgh get exclusive access, there's information on here that hasn't been shared digitally, and so I'm not even going to mention it now, because I want to make sure that you guys know that this has been a well thought out event. It's real, it's happening. We want it to be a community event. We don't want it to be a corporate event. It's more like an on-conference. We want it to build relationships within the community and strengthen them. And really it's taken what happens here, which I'm very grateful for, one of the best meetup groups, professional groups that I've been to in Edinburgh, in Scotland, in anywhere that I've lived. And it's really taken what works here, but putting it into a whole day. So there's going to be great speakers, there's going to be actual music, art, theatre, and there's going to be food there as well, so it'll all be vegan food because there's a big sustainability angle to this. There's a big, the main angle is that this is purpose, because the equation I have for this is people plus purpose equals powerful action. And the people that are speaking are all people who are working with purpose and have had some very powerful actions as a result. And the food that will be there, so that's why the food's all vegan, but it'll end with a pizza party, and it's really an extension as well as the last event, People Planet Pint in UX Edinburgh, which was kind of a pilot for doing this. And so anyone that was there, I think, enjoyed that. So this will just be on a bigger scale. It's in Glasgow, it's in the Barrowlands, in a great venue, and it's October 10th, and until 11:55 p.m. tonight, for some reason they don't do midnight, there will be a special price of £49, and so if you want to get a really good value, the general admission price will be £119. There were some other tickets a little bit higher, but that'll be the general admission. So if you want to get a bargain, I know Scottish people love a bargain, people living in Scotland love a bargain, this is your chance to get it. So thank you, Mike, for letting me announce that, and I hope to see you there. And thanks to the people who've already bought tickets, actually, we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And now we'll head straight on to our first speaker, Kerry. Welcome, Kerry, to the stage.
So, hi everyone. For those of you who haven't met me before, it is lovely to meet you tonight. My name is Kerry, and I am one of the product researchers over at User Testing. But I didn't start out my career journey with UX research in mind. My background is actually as a software engineer. I previously worked at JP Morgan on their graduate engineering program and transitioned there into a UX research career. And tonight I'm going to be sharing a little bit of sort of how I made that journey, what that process looked like, but also the different things that I learned along the way, things about being an engineer that have stuck with me and actually inform how I practice UX today, and hopefully reflect a little bit on how our backgrounds can inform the way that we work. So what on earth does a path from engineering to UX research actually look like? Well, it all started when I went to university with this really big, grand dream. I was like, I'm really into computers. I really want to change the world. I'm going to use my super cool coding skills. I'm going to work for Facebook and Google and Apple, and I'm going to just shake up the world with my excellent engineering abilities. And then I actually got to university and very quickly realized that I just didn't actually enjoy it all that much. The coding modules were really dull, the coursework felt like a chore, and it didn't always play to my natural strengths, which were much more in like the talking to people and understanding the bigger picture. But I was really lucky that at the University of Glasgow, where I studied, there's actually a mandatory human-computer interaction module in your first 6 months. So I was exposed to the world of UX really early on in my studies. I absolutely loved learning how to write user stories, create personas, do usability tests. We actually did a bit of coursework as part of that module where we had to build a prototype of an app using PowerPoint, and we had to present what personas our app was going to serve, do usability testing with our classmates, and it was by far the thing that I enjoyed most that year. I just absolutely caught the bug. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do another UX module until my 3rd year, where there's another mandatory module, but it definitely brought back all of the feelings I'd had in that first module. And it was a big sign for me that it wasn't just a one-off fluke that I enjoyed that first module, and actually, I might have some strengths here and I want to see how I can play with those. And so I did actually make the decision that in my final year, we're given an opportunity to specialise in a different area. I did choose human-computer interaction as my specialism. I basically took any HCI module that was offered to me. I did my dissertation in that area as well, looking at performative interaction in public spaces, and I just absolutely loved every minute of it. The issue that I had when it came to graduating was, a lot of the advice and support that we'd been given had very much been around securing engineering jobs. I didn't really know how to take what I loved and turn it into a career at that point. I knew that I enjoyed deciding what to build more than doing the actual building, but does that mean I want to go into product? Do I want to go into design? What are all of the different UX roles? What does the actual day-to-day for these roles look like? And how on earth do I get in there as an entry-level person with a degree in a discipline that isn't necessarily immediately related? And so I kind of took the default approach, I guess, and I'd interned previously at JP Morgan as a software engineer. I had an offer to go back as a graduate, and so I did join their software engineering program. And so I joined as a full stack developer, and I could do the job. Like, I was a perfectly fine coder, like my code ran, and mostly. But I just wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't fulfilling me in the way that I really hoped that my career would. And I realized that pretty quickly. And so about 6 months in, I had a conversation with my manager, and I sat them down and I was like, look, I can do this engineering stuff, but this isn't what I want to be doing long term. I want to go more into deciding and shaping what we build. How can you help me get there? And I was really lucky. I had a super supportive manager, a really supportive program team as well that ran the graduate program at JP Morgan. And they were totally like, we hear you. We appreciate that maybe this isn't the right job for you. What can we do to help you get there? And so the first step for me was just understanding more about the actual range of roles available in UX and in product side as well, actually. So I was just networking as much as I could, putting time in people's calendars. I was quite lucky that I got to meet one of the UX designers in JP Morgan. We were working on like a charity project together, so I get to see some of their skills in action. I was routinely working with product owners and project managers and just trying to soak up as much as I could about all of these different people, the roles that they did, what they enjoyed about their jobs, what some of the pitfalls maybe were of some of the jobs, and just used that to really shape, okay, where do I see myself fitting in with this? And as a result of that, I realised, okay, I think it's more the UX side of things, maybe design or research, rather than the product side. And once I'd made that decision, I was then able to start thinking about how I'd build the skills that would get me into that job, because I had a lot of academic experience, a lot of the theory from the modules that I'd taken at university, but I didn't necessarily have the hands-on practical experience to back that up. So that was sort of my next mission. So I started just asking my manager, hey, is there any UX work that I can take on? Can you pass some stuff my way? And while there was quite limited UX work available in the space that I worked in, they would give me what they could. I was doing little side projects, I was taking any sort of training modules that I could find, and coming to meetups like these as well. Learned a lot from these, mostly over the COVID years when we were all remote, did a lot of these type of meetup events. And just tried to learn as much as I could. But eventually I found that the first role that I'd been in, I'd got as much out of it as I could. And I started to look at what my next move would be. And I was really lucky that one of our internal UX teams have a bit of a radical model where they have UI developers embedded in the UX team who help parachute into teams to take the designs into fruition. And they had a UI developer position open, so I basically made a deal with the hiring manager. It's like, hey, I'll come to your team, I'll be a UI developer, but I want you to help train me up, give me practical experience in this UX thing and help me figure out how to get there. And somehow I convinced them, and they agreed to it. And so I joined their team, and I very quickly started to be handed different pieces of UX work, and for the first time I was just really enjoying my job. I loved getting to go out and do research and interview customers, note-taking, even all of the analysis, which I know some people can be a little bit dull. I just loved getting in amongst the data and making sense of it all. I loved presenting out findings to stakeholders. And so gradually, we were sort of reducing the amount of development work that I was taking on and slowly passing me on more and more pieces of UX work. Until eventually a UX researcher position came up in the team, and the manager felt that I'd proven myself in the team. They were confident that I was executing independently on pieces of UX work, and so I was offered the UX position within the team. And yeah, so it's been since April 2022, I've been working as a full-time UX researcher, no longer with JP Morgan. I'm now over at User Testing, but it was very much my time at JP Morgan, the resources and the support that I got there that enabled me to make the transition into UX research full-time, and just absolutely loved every minute of it since. So in this whole wild journey that I went on to get here, I definitely picked up a lot of experiences. I think when it's your first job out of university, it's a really formative time of your career. And there's definitely a lot of things that I experienced or did as an engineer that have stuck with me and that I do implement in some shape or form in my UX practice. And so I'd like to spend a little bit of time sharing with you some of the things that I did as an engineer that I think we can all learn from. So first of all, engineering is very much a team sport. There's not a single piece of production software out there that was delivered by just one person, at least not at scale anyway. So you learn a lot about what's required to deliver effectively with others. And when you're in an engineering team, you're going to have a lot of dependencies on other teams, and there's a lot of other teams that are going to have dependencies on you. And your ability to work with those teams effectively is mission critical in you actually delivering what you need to do at the end of the day. And all too often you would end up in situations where you'd have this roadmap of everything that you had to deliver, and there would just be these sort of opaque boxes on your roadmap of a team over there needs to deliver something to us, to unblock us, and you're like, cool, how are they getting on with it? What's their blockers like? Is there anything I can do to support? What's the output going to look like? It just seemed to prompt more questions than answers. And in this scenario, I very much think there is no such thing as over-communicating. I am yet to have anybody tell me, oh, I have way too much information on that team that I depend on. I know too much about what they're doing. It is always the opposite. I think it's really important that when you have a team that depends on you, you're communicating with them what you're doing, not just the high-level title, but in some detail so they can really articulate what it is that you're working on, when they can expect you to deliver that, any impediments that you might see coming, giving them a little bit of a scope on what the output's going to be? Is there anything they can do to prepare for receiving that output whilst you do the work? And yeah, is there any support that they can give you as well, potentially, to help you get things delivered faster? There's an example when I was working as an engineer. I was working on an internal service, and there was a team upstream from us that had to build a new API endpoint for us to call. Now, they could have just said, cool, we'll deliver that in 2 months, see you then, disappeared and went away and worked, but they didn't. Instead, they say, okay, that's going to take us about this long, this is what's going to be involved. Here is the shape that we think that API endpoint is going to take. You can get started building, assuming that's what we're going to deliver, and we'll communicate on how it shapes up. That meant that rather than our team sort of sitting twiddling our thumbs waiting on this magical API endpoint to appear before we could start our job, we were actually able to work concurrently because they'd really clearly communicated with us what we could expect from them and when. And this is something that I do try and take over into my research practice as well. I really like to make sure my stakeholders are aware of what it is that I'm researching, what's in scope, what am I answering for them, what are things that are maybe out of scope of my research, things that they could get started on because my research isn't going to be impacted by it. I like to let them know what to expect from me. Is it going to be a slide deck? Am I going to come back to you with findings? Am I going to go directly to the designers? How am I going to communicate what it is that I've produced? And also then, what can they do to support me? Do I maybe need some support with note-taking? Do I need some support with recruitment? Is there anything that they can do to be empowered to be part of the process of delivery? I think it just helps alleviate some of the frustrations that can come from not really knowing what's happening, feeling like you're just sort of stuck. If you can give people a little bit of agency and feel involved in the process as well, that can be really powerful for making people feel unblocked, even if they are still having to sort of wait on what it is that you're doing. Also, spending so much time producing code, it's very much shaped the way that I produce research deliverables as well. When you're an engineer, your job doesn't just end when you commit the code into GitHub. Your code only has value when it is in the hands of the customer. Doesn't matter how much code you write, how bug-free it is, how readable it is, how fast it runs, if nobody's actually using it. And this is something that I very much have taken forward into my research practice as well. My job doesn't finish when I've presented out my slides and been like, no, here are my fantastic research findings. I love doing research, but I don't do research for the sake of it. I do it because I want to have some kind of impact on our end users. And so I take it as part of my responsibility. The way as an engineer, I would be involved in releasing the code, I would be involved in support tickets, I would be involved in triaging and fixing bugs. As a researcher, it's part of my job to work with the designers. Can I jump on a design critique and help talk through how the designs are reflecting the research? Can I jump on with the engineers and talk through, okay, we've got some maybe technical constraints. How can we make that trade-off between technical constraints and what our customer expectations are based on that research? I very much actively participate in those discussions. There was a fantastic example recently where we'd done some research and we actually did a design jam, research, the product manager, the designer, and UX writing as well. All got on a call, all co-designing together based on the findings to then figure out how we could translate that into a feasible design. And very much with everybody as an active participant in that. And it can be hard sometimes if you feel like there's conversations that are taking place that you're not part of, but it's really important that we find our way in. If we're not being included in those conversations, setting them up ourselves to make sure that it's part of our responsibility and our job to impact the end user and not just present slide decks that are going to then sit in a repository and not actually have the impact that we intended. I think it does make it easier as well to then quantify your impact back, explain to leadership, this is what the UX team did. If you're part of those discussions, that then contributes back. You can say, I was able to speak to engineering, we got this de-scoped and this put in its place because it reflected the user's feedback, and it can really help amplify the voice of research in the room as well. And somewhat counterintuitively, engineers are always trying to write less code. And we do that by never writing anything that somebody else has already written before us. We do that in a lot of different ways. In my engineering team that I worked in, we had a rule: if we found ourselves doing the same thing 3 times, that was a sign that we needed to pull it out, make it a repeatable function. It was a rule of thumb that we used to avoid creating resources for the sake of it, but to make sure that we weren't doing the same thing too many times, because there's no point wasting time repeating yourself, doing things you've already done, but also the more times you do something, the more likely you are to do it wrong. So it's reducing the risk of adding errors as well. We very often look on things like Stack Overflow. Very rarely did I come across a coding problem that was a brand new, original, never seen before problem. There was always somebody out there that had encountered the same thing, and I could go on Stack Overflow and find the answer. There's no code libraries out there that have fantastic teams maintaining them that I can leverage across my code bases. And so why would I write that sort of stuff myself? There's a lot of analogous principles that you can take in UX. Coding libraries could become design systems. Stack Overflow perhaps becomes competitive analysis, looking at what other people have designed already. The functions that we'd create become research templates. And this is something that sometimes when you say it can seem really obvious. Like, of course I'm not going to do something that somebody else has already done. Of course I'm not going to do something that there's a template for. But time and time again, I will see people starting from a blank page to write their research script, knowing that we have templates out there, because it's a thing that we often do on autopilot. We sit down and we think, what am I going to do today? Rather than sitting down and thinking, what's already been done that I can build off of today? And so it's really important that when we see this happening in our teams, we try and break that cycle a little bit. If you see someone in your team doing something from scratch and you know that there's a template out there, socialize that with them, share that with them, help raise awareness of those resources. Make it part of your process as well. And we have some checklists that we follow, like a documented process that we've agreed as a team. And looking at what's already out there is a step that we have to tick off on that process to make sure that we're all actually thinking about that as a routine part of how we work. But also these resources don't just magically appear. So I would encourage you all to take a little bit of a scouts approach and leave things better than you found them. If you have a design systems team, I'm sure they would really appreciate it if people contributed things back for them. Make your research operations person's life easier by helping them create new templates. If you're using a research method that's not been used in your organization before, can you create a template to make it easier for people who come after you? Can you perhaps flag resources that are outdated, that maybe need cleaned up or refreshed? Because we can only enable reuse when there's actual high quality resources out there for us to make use of. And then lastly, we have how engineering has shaped the way that I try and support my development and also the development of people around me who I work with. So for a moment, I want you to imagine that you're that skateboarder. Maybe you've been watching the Olympics recently, some of the medals that have been awarded for skateboarding, and you've been inspired. You're like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to land this really cool new trick. But you're a bit nervous, and so your friends egging you on, and they're like, even if you fail, you're going to learn from it. And you're like, you know what? You're right. You go out, you try the trick, and you absolutely wipe out, hit your head, and now you've got a concussion. Just because they said you could learn from failure doesn't make it safe to fail. We have to actively build culture and structures that mitigate the risks associated with that failure. For that skateboarder, that could have been putting on a helmet. That way he could have learned from the fall rather than ending up with a trip to the doctors. When you're an engineer, certainly as a new engineer, I felt a lot of pressure. Like when I was at university, if I did bad code, I would get a bad grade. That's not the end of the world. When you're working suddenly on a production system, especially in financial services, there is suddenly monetary value associated with my failures. And I found it really hard at first to kind of get over that fear and to actually try and take risks and learn from things. But luckily I was working in an environment where the failures were mitigated. We were trying to fail small and fail fast and hopefully avoid any production incidents along the way. We had lots of things like unit tests to find errors in our code before we even committed it. You have code reviews, get feedback on the style and function of your code. You have staging environments to test your releases. You have backups of your databases if you delete anything. There were loads and loads of safety measures in place that meant when my manager told me, you don't have to be scared, it's okay for you to fail here, I saw the evidence to back that up and to know that, okay, it actually really is safe for me to fail here. And there's a lot of things that we can embed in a UX environment as well to help mitigate some of the risks of failure. That could be, when we're planning a research project, not just diving straight into the methodology, but instead having a conversation with our colleagues. Hey, I'm thinking of taking this approach. Has anybody done something similar? It could be getting your interview scripts reviewed by your stakeholders. It could be doing design critiques on low fidelity designs rather than jumping into something high fidelity. But these are all things that we have to make a conscious part of our process. And there's also an element of responsibility for the leadership as well. When you're asking people to fail in an organisation, you're asking them to be quite vulnerable, and it's important that you show a little bit of vulnerability as well. Engineers absolutely love to sit in a pub and tell horror stories of that time that they wiped out a production database or powered down the wrong server. It's almost a little bit of a badge of honour to exchange some of these failures in the engineering community. And I think that's something we can really learn from in opening up with each other, not just saying it's okay for you to fail, but actually saying, here's a time that I failed, and I failed spectacularly. And you know what? I recovered from it, and I'm here to tell you the tale, because that is really what's going to instill confidence in especially more junior members of staff. I know when I was a junior engineer, it made a big difference hearing how people that I looked up to within the company had failed spectacularly and lived to tell the story in the pub 6 months later. And going back to the topic of reviews that I sort of touched on in the last point, as an engineer, you do an awful lot of reviewing of each other's work. Every piece of code that I've ever committed has been peer reviewed by somebody else in my team, and all of my teammates has been peer reviewed possibly by me. And so you get a lot of experience in reviewing as an engineer, and you really realise that it's not a skill that people enter industry necessarily knowing how to do. It is something that you have to make quite a conscious effort to actually develop yourself. And there are sort of two main things for me that stood out in my experiences as being really vital for an effective review. The first one is knowing how to ask for feedback effectively, making it really clear what is it that I've struggled on this time? What did I find challenging? What am I maybe uncertain of? Is there anything that's out of scope for feedback? Sometimes when you're writing code, there would be technical constraints where I know that's maybe a bit messy and it's not how I'd love to have written it, but it's what I'm having to do at the moment, so please don't point it out to me because I can't change it. So it's drawing the lines of what you want feedback on, what you don't, and that helps then give the reviewer some boundaries to work within. And then when the person giving the review as well, making sure that you're structuring your feedback in a way that's actually really actionable. And there's a 3 bullet point approach that I personally find quite effective. The first bullet point being, what is the thing that you've noticed that you would like them to change? And what is the thing that you're giving feedback on? And that's being objective and sticking to the facts when describing it, but also giving a specific example of when it happened to help give them the context. In the second bullet point, you're then outlining what is the change that you would like to see? What is something they could do instead that is going to be more effective? And then finishing up with how you frame that feedback. We don't want to focus on the potential negative impacts of what they've currently done. Let's focus on, if you change bullet point 1 and you do bullet point 2 instead, this is the positive impact that change is going to have. I found this to be effective for code reviews, for design reviews, and even for sort of personal feedback as well, because it's making clear in a really objective way what to change and how to change it. And if you can attach resources as well, if you're telling someone, hey, I think there's a better way that we could be doing something, give them the resources that they might need to then go away and learn how to do that thing. You can't just assume that they're going to necessarily know how to put that into action. But also have to have a discussion within your teams as well about, as a team, what are our expectations of each other when it comes to feedback? What points in our process does it make sense for us to ask for feedback? How do we like to give and receive our feedback? In what forums? Do we do it in groups? Do we do it in one-to-ones? and try and codify that process as much as possible. In our research team at User Testing, when we are reviewing each other's scripts, we actually have a checklist that we follow. It's something that we've agreed on as a team. These are the things that we want to make sure that we've covered in a review for it to be considered a complete and effective review of somebody's script. And what that does is it makes feedback really routine. People sort of know what they're expecting. It's not onerous for the people doing it, because the more frictionless and routine you can make the process of giving feedback, the more people are going to do it. If you're having to leave people to figure out, should I ask for feedback? How do I ask for that feedback? What should I get feedback on? It becomes an onerous task and something that they're not going to do as often. But that's quite enough about me for now. Hopefully there's been some morsels in there of interesting information, but I would actually really like to hear a little bit about the backgrounds of everybody in the room. So I'm just going to ask for a little bit of a show of hands. So who in the room, when they left school, immediately went on to study a UX qualification? Okay, so we've got a few. How many studied a design discipline but not UX directly? Okay, we've got a few more. And how many studied something totally unrelated to UX or design? And we've got quite a lot. Because UX is such a new discipline, people have came to it through a variety of different paths, and it really does take a whole host of different skill sets to make an effective UX team. And quite often we don't actually realise how the journeys and paths that we've taken shape the way that we do things. We assume that because we know something, it's going to be common knowledge and everybody else is going to do it too. And that's why I think it's really important that we take time to reflect. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to do a 30-minute presentation on their background, but reflect on, how did I get where I am? What have I learned? What's maybe different from paths that other people have taken? And then share those stories with your teams. It's only by having these conversations with each other that we can learn and realise where some of these differences actually are. And so I do have a little bit of a homework task for you all, a little bit of research for you all to go and do. And that's either tonight, during the break here, or at work tomorrow, have a conversation with someone whose background you're maybe not as familiar with. Try and find out, how did they get where they are? What are the experiences that have shaped them? What are lessons they've learned along the way that are maybe different from what you have? And if you do go away and do this, I would love if you sort of message me on LinkedIn and share with me and share with everybody here as well what you find, because I think sometimes we take it for granted what our experiences have taught us, and it's really important for us to have these conversations. With that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions, but thank you very much for listening to me talk about myself for half an hour.
Thank you very much, Kerry. We've got Ricky at the back there with a roving mic for questions, so or thoughts or comments.
Thank you very much for that. That's great. I got almost the same background, so I completely empathise. It just took me longer to see the light and move over. So I thought there's some great thoughts about taking lessons from engineering and bringing them into UX. What about flipping it? With your experience now in UX, what lessons would you take from that and give to your past self or your previous engineering colleagues?
I think something that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately is how we define the MVP, the minimum viable product. I think as an engineer, I was sometimes quite focused on the functionality. Did it function? Could people do the thing that they needed to do? And I didn't necessarily consider always the experience of the thing. Just because it's minimum, it still needs to give a decent experience, even if it's not the gold standard experience that the fully fleshed version would give. MVP doesn't mean you just disregard the experience entirely, and it's finding that balance between fast delivery, functionality, but also delivering an experience that's going to be a quality of life improvement for your users as well.
that you were a developer and then became a UX designer, because I feel like one of my main challenges at work is kind of like managing the expectations between each team. And it's usually like someone says, oh, can you do this thing? And then as a UX designer, I'm like, I'm not sure, let's check with development. And development are like, absolutely not. And I feel like we go around in circles over and over and over again. And we're trying to like solve these problems with like, I don't know, having consistency with design systems and like naming conventions. But I was wondering if there's anything that you've maybe not said already you think could make development's life a whole lot easier from, I don't know, being in the UX team, or how to, I don't know, improve that relationship and communication as well.
I think sometimes it's really hard to empathise with a situation that you've not been in. You know, we're all in the business of empathising with people, but there is only so far that you can get without actually having been in a situation yourself. So I think it's really good to break down the barriers between the different teams and see a little bit of everybody's world. That could be, you know, as a designer, trying out a little bit of coding, you know, doing an online coding module and learning a little bit about what it's like to write code, asking engineers, you know, if they're saying, you know, this is going to take ages, like, hey, can you pull up, can you show me, can you walk me through where the issue is? Having a bit of curiosity about each other's world, but also like pulling the engineers into our side of things as well. Like, I'm a really big advocate for bringing engineers in as observers during my research sessions, so they can actually see, you know, like what I find in those sessions directly impacts what's end up in their backlog. And I want them to be able to sort of join those dots of like, oh, she did that session and that came up there, and I can see how that's then impacted what's in my backlog here. Because it's just demystifying a little bit, and I think it comes back to the point around not being an opaque box on the roadmap. Just having a little bit more understanding and hands-on experience with each other's worlds, rather than feeling like separate teams doing separate things and you're not really sure why people are saying the things that they're saying.
Questions, anyone? I've got a thought. I've got a couple. It's not really, it's not a question. Thanks. So firstly, thank you for making me feel my age, because UX didn't really exist as a course. Like when I grew up, or when I had when I were a lad, or when I had my first job, it was called human-computer interaction back then, which I guess is the closest thing, right? Back in the olden days to what UX is now, maybe, I don't know. Secondly, I thought the point around not creating things from scratch, that's something that really resonated, and I think it's probably something that we're maybe a little bit guilty about in user research. So yeah, you know, there's things like reusable templates, but there's also actually what do we already know about this? And let's not reinvent the wheel. I think there's probably quite a bit of that goes on. So I think that's a really important reminder. So yeah, no, thank you very much. Though there's some real great lessons there. Thank you very much for your very insightful talk, Kerry. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're a little bit ahead of time actually, so we can take a 5 minute, just a 5 minute break. 10 minute, 10-minute break. In a minute. It's very quiet, isn't it? So yeah, if we can have a big hand for our second speaker of the evening, Val.
Thank you, Mike. Well, some of you know or seen me here before, sometimes with a camera, taking photos of the event. Now it's my turn to speak here for the first time, so not nervous at all. We'll handle it. So I'm a designer, I'm a UX designer, and I'll be presenting a bit more about myself now. But my presentation is called UX Design Means Business, and as you can guess, it's a little bit of a wordplay. We mean business because we're serious about what we do, but we also mean business because we work in business, right? And when I mean business, I'm not talking only about for-profit organizations, I'm talking about general organizations. And we'll talk about that, the relationship between the two. So the rest of the title for the presentation, if you will, it's how systems thinking can help designers succeed, and that's like very flashy and selly. But actually, it's more like giving you tips and explaining you how my brain works and how I use that throughout my career, and now that I'm a UX designer, how I use it today. So this is taken from a big author in the systems thinking world. We all heard that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. We all know this phrase. And this person takes that and said a system is more than the sum of its parts. It's defined by the relationship between the elements, right? And this is what we're going to discuss today. A bit of a disclaimer for that is that I'm going to use some elements of systems thinking theory to explain a few things, but actually what I'm going to share to you today is how my brain works and how it has been working, and I used it in my previous and my current career. So it's not that I'm a fan of system thinking, and I'm not selling a methodology here. I'm just using it to explain how things work for me. So just so we know, I'm not selling anything here. So I'm be covering first of all, a bit about me, so you understand where I'm coming from and why I will say the things I will say here today. Share with you what worked for me when moving into UXD, how to apply this at your job, and also what you do if you're looking for work or plan to look for work, because I know sometimes some of the attendees here are people also transitioning into UX, so maybe they are not at the stage of having a job just yet. And I hope this inspires some ideas. This is not a recipe for anything. It's not the recipe for success. But maybe might spark some ideas, and definitely would be good if it sparks a discussion at the end. So a bit about me. I was listening to Kerry before, and I'm saying like, oh, how is this when you're young and you don't have that long of a career? For me, it's a bit different. First of all, I'm a UX designer now, of course. I'm also a landscape photographer. If you didn't know, now you know. This is why sometimes I'm here with a camera, but I don't do people or events for that matter. I tend to do landscape photography. And I started with that at the same time, let's say that I was starting to transition in, and that's because I love Scotland, and I love going around Scotland taking photos. I'm also Argentinian, so if you hear this weird accent, that's why. I'm not originally from here. I've been living here for about 7 years. And I'm also Croatian, so a little bit of a fun fact there too. But if I had to define myself a bit more, and try again to explain you how my brain works, I'm probably a bit of a love child between Sheldon and Lisa. So especially from these particular 2 episodes, maybe not all of their personalities and their brains that are quite complex. For example, Sheldon rearranges the episode that he rearranges Howard's and Bernadette's closet. And I'm a bit like that. If you leave me with a wardrobe to organize, I'm the happiest person around. And I'll do it by colors, by seasons, and all of that. And I'll fight over my husband to do his, and he won't allow me to do it. So I'm that person. And if I can do it for myself, even better, because then the categories and everything are up to me and what works for me. I have to do it for others, which I did for a long time in my jobs. Then it's good. But of course, I need to negotiate about all of that. And then on the Lisa side, this is a particular episode where the Simpsons go to a coastal city for holidays, and Marge says to her, "You can bring a friend," and she's like, "No, the books are on my own friends." And then she goes and tries to make new friends at this place. It was not that extreme, but when I was a kid, I was very, very shy, and I was the kid that won't speak unless it's spoken to, and that was very hard for me making friends because I had some friends, but it was still very hard, and because I was reading a lot and spending a lot of time in myself, in my own brain, and talking to adults, because I'm also the eldest daughter in my family, that made that it was really difficult to speak to people my age. Later in this episode, when Lisa's trying to make friends, she's trying what jokes would land with the people, and then change them if they didn't land. That was me in high school, actually, a little bit older, but I was trying with friends to see, because I want to be part of the cool kids, but I have to think about and try it instead of just being more spontaneous, let's say, about it. Then I learned to be more spontaneous, but a bit of my brain again. So now, more seriously a bit, an overview of my career. So as I said, it's more difficult to explain when you have a big career behind you. I have 20 plus years of experience working in leadership and subject matter expert roles or specialist roles. This is some of the companies I worked for. Probably the most well-known ones. I also worked for some smaller companies. This is the previous career, and now as a UX designer, I worked in Phoenix Space, which is a small charity and mostly volunteer work I did there. At ESPC, this was until this year, and now very recently I moved to Royal London as one of their UX designers. So as you can see, I have all this like international company type of incorporations type of experience behind me. So that will come in handy for what I will explain later. But I know what you're thinking. I can read your minds. And you're thinking, this girl looks too young to have 20 plus years of experience. I know you're thinking about that. And certainly if you're not thinking it, one time a hiring manager did ask me this during an interview, and it was super awkward. She said, like, you look too young to have done all of that, which hits all the wrong notes, right? Because it's not only hinting at my age, which is a big no-no, but it's also telling me basically you're a liar, which, doesn't play well in an interview. As you can guess, I didn't end up working there. But it all makes sense, I promise. I'll tell you a bit more about how Argentinians do things, because we do things a bit different than here. I started working at companies with administrative roles, not just doing some things here and there. When I was 17, so I hadn't even finished high school, and I was doing morning school, and afternoon I was working at a company. I was not officially on their payroll, of course, because I was too young, and it was a local company, but I still was doing work. I had a whole area of the company under me, so I was already doing it, and they hired me because I knew English and computers. So that was their key reason to hire me at that age. Also in Argentina, there are no student loans. Such a concept doesn't exist. So you have to start studying at 18 if you go to university, and you have to work to pay for your studies. Tuition is not as expensive, but you can go to, of course, public university, but still you need to pay for everything else. So if your parents are not wealthy enough or used to do that to pay for you while you study, you need to go out there and work. And for a lot of middle class and working class families, that's to be expected. So my parents told me, go find work and pay for yourself. So that's what I did, basically, because I wanted also to be financially independent. But that actually makes everything harder, as you can imagine, because you can only study part-time at night after working all day. So that delays you getting your degree in time as well. But also, it made every job a learning opportunity. And by the time I got to my business management degree, I knew a lot of things I have done them before. So I was even explaining sometimes to some of my mates at university, or teachers were asking me to give real life examples of things I have done, actually. But even so, within the context of Argentina, let's say, I was still quite a bit of an outlier, because at 20 years old, I already was a team leader. I was managing even up to 26 people, but usually around 15 to 18 people. And someone just saw I could do that and gave me the opportunity. It was in a customer service big operation for the United States. So I could speak English. I was doing things well. The people from the client liked me. So they gave me a shot to be a team leader at the night shift, which I have a lot of anecdotes about that era. I can tell you afterwards at the pub. And then at 25 years old, there are other roles in between, but just to make it easier to understand. At 25 years old, I was already a process manager, was a subject matter expert. I was doing a lot by a very young age. I didn't have my degree even, and I was doing all these things. Eventually, I reached out all the way up to chief risk officer for an insurance company, and eventually decided to get out of all of that with my husband, who I met at the same time when I was a chief risk officer. We were part of the same organization. We decided both to leave that world because we were super stressed out and also had a long distance relationship. Moved to the UK and then started climbing down a bit from that ladder, let's say. So I went all the way up to the ladder and then started climbing back. But I'm going to concentrate now a bit on the first side that I was saying that I did too much when I was very young. Around my 25th birthday, that I was already doing a lot there, things are starting to crumble basically for me. So all my house of cards start shaking. I was very ambitious. Of course, I wanted to do things. I was curious. People saw that I could do things, so they were giving me, a lot of managers were giving me the responsibility, but not giving me the position or the pay. And I took the things because I wanted to do them. But I was still a shy person, very much so, that everything was hard for me, like speaking to people, leading people, everything was really hard for me because I was that shy person still. So eventually I burned out, basically. I was in a high-stress environment in big customer service and dealership and technical support environments for big companies. So that is a very high-pressure environment already, and being middle management there is very high pressure. So yeah, I pretty much snapped. Also, around my 25th birthday, well, actually, for my 25th birthday, I had a life crisis, because why not? And I decided I've achieved so much until that point, but I felt like my life didn't have a purpose beyond that. Like, where am I going, right? So I sort of set long-term goals for myself. I wanted my house. I wanted to be completely financially independent from my family. I wanted to have my degree, which by that time was very hard for me to do because I was doing all the things at work. I was given more responsibilities. I had to do overtime. It was really hard for me to get that degree, so I made it a point to get that degree. And then something good, very good happened, that a colleague at the time, we were doing a lot of leadership, these leadership trainings and profiling, because companies pay for you to do that when you're a manager and so on. And every time that I did these tests, my profile turned out to be more of the specialist type instead of the big manager, managing lots of people underneath. But my routes so far until that point was going to be a big operations manager. That was what I was heading. People were giving me already shadow roles for big managers. So I was heading that way, but I saw I didn't want to do that. So a colleague took me under his wings. He said he was a Six Sigma specialist at the time, so process improvement and quality assurance and all. He was working on all of that at IBM. And he said, if you really want to be a specialist, if you really want to do this job, I'll help you, I'll train you. again, this was before my degree and everything. So he started teaching me everything from like probabilistic to everything you can think of. He was training me. And he did a very special thing that very much changed my career, which is he started to show me what the business model was of the operation I was in. This changed completely how I understood everything, because I knew we were in I won't enter in details, but at IBM at that time, we were in a very special type of operations, which I noticed that the people from IBM US were treating us different than other providers. And then he explained why that was to me and why we were different from the rest of the companies we were working with. And that made the whole thing make sense. Like, oh, okay, now I understand why there's all this emphasis and not running into higher costs, why this is emphasis and treating us differently than the rest of the companies. Okay, now it makes sense. So I understand from that point onwards that the business model affects what you do all the way back to the last person in the company. That was very key for me and very eye-opening at the time. So how I progressed from there, well, after the burnout, I decided to take things a bit slower. I still went on to have a successful career, but a much more balanced one. So eventually, I obtained my degree in business management. I managed less or no people, depending on the position, and became a subject matter expert. Completed various courses and certifications, depending on the role. Moved to the very top of the ladder as a chief risk officer, as I showed before, and then moved eventually to Edinburgh after having a taster living in Zurich for a few months, and started over pretty much. And then during the pandemic, I decided to start over again, and that's when I changed careers. So just to complete the bit about me, what I sort of specialized in, if I have to make a summary, and it's very difficult making a summary of my career, is that especially at the beginning and for a long time, I specialize in everything that is back office. And these are the actual titles of I've been called throughout my career. I specialize on how things work at the back and make sure those things worked. So if we promise a customer something, that something was delivered. And then I took more of the overall company view as a chief risk officer, and then when I moved here as a senior compliance advisor, so making sure things not only worked, but only worked accordingly to regulations and internal controls and frameworks and whatnot. So because I got bored of all that, and especially the last part, it was very legalistic, and that was not me, I said, well, now I want to be more creative. I want to do something different. And going to the front office, being a designer, helped to design products, not just control them. It made sense. So I tried that. So now the interesting part. How what I learned helped me transition to UX. First of all, a bit about knowledge work. We are all knowledge workers here. But knowledge work is messy. Nothing better to work in processes to know that. Knowledge work is the application of information. So knowledge work, or knowledge itself, doesn't exist apart from people. So much so that it's very different to categorize it, to organize it. And it's the same piece of information, depending on who sees it and who analyzes it, will produce many very different type of knowledge. How do you do that? You work with two UX designers, you give them the same input, the same research, let's say, you will end up having different designs. This is true, whatever the position is, a developer, a designer, an accountant. Well, accountant is a bit different, but everyone that has to do an analysis of an input and produce an output, that will depend on the person. So how do you measure knowledge? How you deal with knowledge? How you test and how you assess that it's continually evolving. So all of that created very interesting challenges throughout my career. So I knew I was changing to another knowledge type of work. So I know that I'm dealing with all of these problems. Not problems, but realities, basically. And I also understood that, as I was saying before, businesses are systems. Businesses are, they have different models. They are made of people. Those people have this knowledge themselves, but also interact among themselves. And that's also always changing. So the key thing for me was, or what I learned to look at, is different businesses models and what are their goals. As I said, some businesses, even for-profit business, might have a project that is not actually for profit. It's actually to gain more business, for example. And that makes the project totally different than the other ones. So you need to understand these things. Speaking to people at all levels of the company, interviewing people, because I was analyzing processes and documenting them a lot of the times, I had to sit and listen to other people. That gave me a lot of insight on what people do. And I had to speak to the very person in the mailing room, shipping out letters to people, to the board of directors. And I learned a lot about that, like how all the different levels think and how they think their role impact the business and what the business is. Culture and management style, this is a bit obvious, but of course each organization has its own culture and management style, and depending on that, the outcomes and the knowledge will be very different. How communication is handled, for me, I'm one of those that believe that most problems are communication problems within organizations. So this is one of the critical areas for me that I always look at. And, sorry, went too fast there. And where change and resistance to change happens, because there are always places in the company, even if the whole company is not doing any change, there's always someone doing change in the company, trying new things, or just going out of the standard frameworks and processes. And there's always places at the company where there's resistance to change. It could be management, but it also could be the people below that are comfortable just the way things are. So, okay, that's good. That's my learnings. But how do you apply this to the organization you are today, let's say? Okay, be curious, ask, search, learn. So I would say ask for this information, look it up in the intranet or whatever you can. You need to understand things like the 4 Ps. This is a very marketing business type of concept, but it's this 4 Ps here: product, place, price, and promotion. Understand what the company sells, how it sells it, to whom, where. Customer segments and channels, financial situation of the company. This is key, and I would say it's even more important if it's a small or a startup company, because that depend not only the situation of the company and its goals, but your own job. So I always make a point of understanding this. For example, I'll tell you not that long ago, actually a few months ago, in an interview for a company that is smaller, is a scale-up actually, I made a point of asking in the interview, because I have been researching the company, and there was some information about funding rounds, but there were not like a lot of information. So I asked them, what's your funding situation? Are you profitable? I asked all the things in the interview. They were amazed that I was asking these questions. But it's not only important, I also asked them how I can contribute to those goals, of course. But it's also important to me. I want to know if 1 year from now I will have a job, right? So it makes sense to ask these questions. Operations and IT systems, of course, we need to work with IT and all that, but we need to understand the architecture behind that. The operations, how they're managed, even if we don't deal as designers all the time with operations, because we're working with product people, because we're more on the front office, they are the ones that are going to implement whatever we design. So these are the guys that are carrying the ship. And I've been there. I know how hard it is working in operations. So they get a little bit of a bad reputation in a lot of companies because they are the guys in the dark room making things happen and taking care of the customers, like by phone and all that. But they're very important. And it's really key to understand how that works. And organizational structure, of course, who's who. Every time I enter a job, regardless of the job, the industry, or whatever, first thing I do is give me the organizational chart. I start studying all the structure, who's who reports to whom. Of course, in big companies, that'll take time to fully understand. But first, I start with my team and expand from there. I talk to this person, who's this person, who he reports to. And I start understanding all of this because I get to understand who's the decision maker, who can open the doors, who can actually shut the doors. So it's very important to know who you're speaking to. And not because you have to be afraid. If it's a manager, for example, or someone higher than you, it's not just to be afraid of them or anything. It's just so I know the person's background, or can imagine, let's say, the person's background before I speak to them, and can see what's the type of level of communication I can have with them. Well, okay, let's say you gather the info, but what do you do with it, right? Okay, you can find, with this information, you can find allies and key decision makers, as I was saying. You can find who do I need to talk to get this done, or to get this information that I need. Also, understand opportunities and constraints. There's always places at the company that, as I said, that will be prone to change, others that will not be prone to change, but you have to find those spots, talk to these people, see what's like, right? Also work within budget or fight for resources. This is particularly interesting point if you're thinking about research, for example. It happened to me in my previous job that first of all, they had no idea because I was their first UX designer. So they have a little bit no idea what research was or how it could be done. But the first thing they told me is like, we don't have the budget for that, even if they didn't know exactly what I was talking about. Or it's going to be hard, right? And I knew they had a limited budget because, again, it's been as a for-profit company, it's a sort of a cooperative type of sort. So everything gets reinvested in the business. So there's not a lot to go with there. But I told them, I can do this very cheaply for you. And I showed them, I explained how. They told me, try it. We did it. They were happy with the results. So it could be done. And it only cost, for one study, it only cost a few vouchers to people. On the other one, the clients are part of the people we were designing for are part of the organization, actually, a part of this sort of cooperative. So they did it for free, basically, because they were going to be the beneficiaries of it anyway. So I show it could be done easily, cheaply, and fast. And then they bought it, right? But I couldn't have done that if I didn't understand first what was the company's financial situation and the budget or no budget they had for this. Sometimes companies do have the budget, so you need to fight for the resources, but for that you will need to present sort of a business case, and if it makes sense. And you cannot win all the battles, so of course you have to be strategic. Then influence stakeholders. With all this information, of course, if you know the financial situation of the company, again, who's who you can reach out to, where the information is, then you can start influencing people. Recently, at my new company, actually, so I am still very new and still understanding a lot of things, but I started working and helping the head of design rearranging a few things on the intranet with a new framework they have for design, and to work with other stakeholders on design. And then I was put on a project, and design was being brought for the first time at the discovery phase. So great, we're going to be able to do stuff like research and stuff like that. And then everyone was given tasks, except the UX designers. So we were at the meetings, but no one was paying attention to us. So I said, okay. I asked some people around, like, does this always happen like this? And they said, yeah, usually UX is not part of this. Okay, I could have just stayed there and not do anything with that and just says, okay, this UX design, I'm part of the meetings, but UX design doesn't do any of this. I'll sit back. Instead of that, I just went to the head of design, which was we were working on this framework. And because I read the framework and I knew that we were supposed to be doing stuff at that stage now, I asked, like, does it always is like this? And I used also my position as a new person also to ask about this. Like, I want to understand the company. Do we always work like this? Or we should be doing something in this case? And he says, oh, no, you should be doing something, definitely. And then a lot of conversations happen at the back of that. And now we have tasks in the delivery phase. So definitely, if you understand all these things at the background, you can go and know which buttons to push to make things happen. Again, you won't always win every battle, but you can be strategic about it and go and try. And then, of course, speak the business language, meaning you can talk to other people, for example, product people, marketing people, other people, in the way they talk instead of how we talk as designers. So, okay, we get the information, we know what to do with it, but how do I approach people, right? Like, how do I talk to other people that are different from me, have other roles and responsibilities. First of all, listen. Listen to them. Ask them. People love to talk about what they do, so ask them and listen. As I said before, because I was working in processes and frameworks and procedures and quality for a long time, my job was sitting with other people to listen to what they did. So it was very enlightening. I got to understand a lot, but also I always had the chance to explain to them what I could do for them. It was not just documenting the process and put it in a manual and that's it. I could have done that already, of course, but I always try to explain. Oh, you have this concern, you have this problem with your process or with your role. I can take it to a manager now, and we can get a way to improve it for you. Also find the path of least resistance. This has to do with change. Like if you know who to go, then because you listen, you know who's who, and you know what they do, and you know their problems, you know who to contact and where is easiest to go within the company. Of course, don't use jargon. Don't lecture people unless you're asked to present or to do something about your role. Just listen, but don't try to lecture people. Try to actually be in their shoes. And after, this is something that has worked for me very well, now as a UX designer and before. Offer to present about your work and what you do. If you have the chance, for example, at ESPC, which is a smaller company, I said, okay, no one understands design because I'm their first UX designer. I offered to do a presentation that included the CEO, who could not attend, unfortunately, but the rest of, or part of the rest of the leadership team was there, and I explained about what UX design was. Didn't solve all my problems, but at least they understand a bit more then. And I did it alongside a presentation about research results, or insights. So it was a brief introduction because I also don't want to bore people. So this is all for people working, right? But I imagine some of you here are looking for work or are thinking about looking for work, or you're transitioning into UX and haven't even started looking for work. But if you are planning to look for work, and this usually is, it doesn't have to be for new people into UX, it could be for anyone really. What do you do? How do you apply all this type of thinking and knowledge? And you definitely can. I would say, the first thing I would say is just don't look for any role and think strategically about your career. If you're a senior person, like me, I was a very senior person in my whole career, just any role won't do. I could have done the typical thing, shoot to everything around and see what lands. I didn't do it because it was a waste of time. I did, especially I started in visual design and then moved a bit more into UX. I talked to coaches, of course, and a lot of people to advise me on this, and people that were senior designers, and they all told me the same thing. You just don't go to junior roles. I mean, it will be a waste of time. You're overqualified for them. Because even though I'm new to design, I have all this other experience with me. So usually a junior is a junior because they don't understand how to manage stakeholders, how to present, how to talk to meetings, and all these things that I already had. So they say, look for your way in. It's going to be difficult, but usually startups, this is what I did in the end. Volunteering, startups, those are the places where a senior person starting over in design could go, because startups really need you to wear a lot of hats at the same time and don't have the time to teach you how to present at a meeting, or what you need to know these things ideally for them. And this is how I did it, basically. If you look to industries, you know, if I go back to the first slide and I show you the companies I worked for before here and the new ones, you will see there's a trend there. I started in a charity, and my last work as a senior compliance advisor was in a charity. So I had that knowledge and I could make that transition. Not ESPC because that's a property, but I also know a bit about property here in Edinburgh, so I could sell that in the interview as well. But especially in Royal London, Royal London is a pensions and life insurance company. I worked in insurance for 5 years before, so I could sell that as well. So definitely there are things that you can take from your old career and bring them and trying to find a way to sell yourself, even if you're new to design. show off at interviews. This is very interesting, and definitely I needed some coaching on this throughout my career, because in my old career, and olden times as well, I would go into interviews and there were no requirements of portfolios, exercises, none of that. I just had interviews talking to people. They asked me questions, I replied, and then I had the job or not. But doing all of this extra work just for interviews, it was a bit crazy and a bit something that I was had to, take a few minutes to understand and to deal with, and not just wanting to throw the whole design thing out of the window. So I would say show off if you have the knowledge. You are the expert of you, and we'll come back to that. So show off what you know. First of all, I would say show interest in how the company operates. Again, as I was saying in the example before, ask about the company during the interview. Usually, employers love that. As I said before, learn their 4 Ps, that particular company you're interviewing for. Do all the research you can through the internet. If they're a small company, probably that's a little bit more difficult than if they're a big company, but still, search the net, talk to people if you know people that have worked there, or reach out to them through LinkedIn. Definitely you can find about their financial situation, latest projects, products, and all of that. Inquire about their business model during the interview, how you can help them achieve those goals. In the interview, it's always about how you can help the employer. It's not about how they can actually make your life better by giving you a job. And also tailor, this I was told by a coach, and I did it, and it's very effective. Tailor every example, even if it's from your previous career and everything, how you can, and even from a previous employer within UX design, tailor that example to the company you're going to. Sell it to them, like as if you were a consultant and you were trying to win a business, right? That usually works very well. And so we can assimilate this a bit with everything we were talking. Your career is your business, right? If you're a freelancer, this is quite obvious, right? But even if you're not a contractor or a freelancer and you're looking for employment, full-time employment, you're still a business of yourself, let's say. And you have to sell you. I mean this in the right way. You have to show off who you are and how you can bring value to your employer. So think of your career as a system. So when I said before, businesses are systems. So think of your career as another system. What's the ROI of your job search strategy? I on purpose, I didn't go into business jargon during this presentation. There's no point in doing so. The only thing I would say for this is you don't need to know a formula. You don't need to do any math. But you need to know what you're putting into your job search, but also your career in general, and what you're getting out of it. So I listen, for example, still today, I listen to designers saying, I won't spend this much on a domain for my portfolio. Or I won't, I don't know, I won't do this CV this way, or I won't pay a CV writer, or I won't do this. I know it's spending money, but you probably spend thousands of pounds in a boot camp or in a university course, and what's an extra 50 pounds to pay a CV writer if they're going to do something you don't know how to do anyways? What's the return of that? Return of investment, that metric, again, you don't need to do the math. But this is how I analyze things. If I pay, and I did it at the time, not now, but at the time, I paid a CV writer, for example. That cost me, with the LinkedIn profile and everything, I think it was like 70 pounds, something like that. It was super cheap. And it was a senior writer, actually. They got me because of my long-standing career. They appointed me a senior CV writer. She did a spectacular job that I couldn't have done of translating everything I did and know to something credible for UX designers. And the return of that is a high-paying job. So it makes total sense for me to invest those 75 pounds or 70 or whatever that was. A lot of people don't think in those terms. Things like, oh, a domain costs, and I'm going to say something, 100 pounds a year. I won't do that, right? Well, but you're maybe losing out on having a professionally looking portfolio. And you may think, is it stupid that people look if you have a domain or a free domain? Yeah, it might be stupid, but people look at these things because these are part of your presentation, the business of you, right? So those things are the type of things you want to think about. Where I want to be from now, or 3 years from now, or whatever. And again, you don't have to be super specific about it, but have a rough idea where you're going, like businesses do when they start planning. And what are my goals, and what do I need to make that happen? This is going from those like larger objectives or places you want to be at eventually. How do you make that happen today? How you start little by little going there. Today, I was talking to my manager about my development plan, and she was having a laugh because I said, oh, I want to do this and that. That was my idea about development plan. And she says, like, wow, you're putting yourself a far-reaching goal that is actually way beyond the time of this particular development plan. And I said, yes, but that's always the way I did. And then I'll start working that way. And this is what I want to do. It might be within this company, maybe it will take me various companies to get there. But if I don't have that vision of where I want to go, how do I start, right? Keep your brand consistent. This is also something that sometimes strikes me a bit with designers. As you are the designer, you think about visual stuff, supposed or part of that is at least. If you see my presentation today and you look at my portfolio and you look at my LinkedIn profile, the branding is all the same. Unless, well, LinkedIn doesn't allow me to use my fonts, but if you look at my portfolio, it's the same fonts, the same color, the same logo, everything is there. Why? Because I'm selling, again, the business of me. I need to be consistent, even in my tone of voice. As I said before, you are the expert of you. No one knows you better than you do. No one knows your skills better than you do. So you have to go out and tell that to other people. Like, I know this very well. I can help you with this and that. And show your value proposition. For example, in my case, that's, I know how businesses work. So I learned that actually, again, it's not everything something I knew and I knew how to do from the beginning. Actually, through coaching and through working with people, with mentors and so on, they told me, oh, you know this. And sometimes people from outside, you understand this much better than you do. People from outside says, oh, but you have all this business experience, actually. I had the fantastic opportunity to help someone that comes to these meetings, Mark. He has his startup. And he was one of the first ones I saw that called me a business savvy designer. And then I thought, oh, okay, yeah, that might be actually true. I haven't thought of, it's not that I had the idea. Someone else saw me and had the idea. And then I talked to coaches and they also said, like, yeah, that's probably your value. So I started calling myself that now. So just quick recap and takeaway. I think we're good on timing still. Yeah, good. But yeah, closing now. So benefits of thinking about systems or businesses as systems. You can come up with holistic solutions, take into account the need of all stakeholders, not just you and your immediate needs, or the immediate needs of your project, if you will, but the larger company, the larger teams. See how people, process, and technologies are all connected, interact with each other, and also modify each other at the same time. Spot patterns, identify the right areas to focus. How do what you do impact on the other parts of the business? How if you go this route, you end up somewhere else that maybe is not desired? For example, having a deep understanding of problems, but getting different views. This is, of course, sometimes we think, oh, this is obvious. But it's not quite obvious when you start doing it. And this is what I said, talk to other people and see what they do. You think you have a lot of constraints, a lot of less budget and all the problems. You don't have enough hours in the day to do everything. The rest of the people are the same as you. And probably sometimes they even have more constraints than you. And so unless you understand that, you don't know how to effectively communicate with them. Reduce the risk of understanding of unintended consequences. If you understand how the wider thing works, you know that if you press a button here, you'll destroy something over there. And this is very typical with product creation, I would say, in particular product development. We tried to solve this problem and we ended up creating a lot of problems. The MVP culture is definitely not helping with that. So this is something we need to get out of that MVP view and try to see the whole thing. Building buy-in and support for solutions. Well, this is also related to everything we said before. So as the last thing, design the systems to produce better outcomes. So systems thinking, or the way to see businesses as systems and the whole of things, doesn't mean that you have to trump design thinking or anything like that. Both are really complementary, actually, and work very well together, because you want that design thinking view, especially as UX designers. We want to have that user view, that not forgetting that the user is there, the research, all of that. We want that to happen, and we want to inform the other bit. But we need to understand the whole. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult being asked, trying to do something here, and then other things happening, and we don't know that, because then that will influence our job, whether we want it or not. It will happen. So it's just us being aware of that and how what we are doing impacts the rest. I think I've said everything else here. I would say, just emphasize again the last bit. Don't lose the sight of the whole, even if you're modifying just a bit of it. I'm always the one to say, hey, remember, we have this other project that's also touching on this, or just, we're heading in this direction, we might end up trumping on something else. I'm always the one to do that. So remember, you don't have to be an expert in every part of the business. You'll find the information odd and challenging first. You'll have to go out of your comfort zone, that's definite. If you're going to talk to other people, present about yourself, all of these things, you'll have to go out of the comfort zone. Ask for explanations. People love to talk about their jobs, as I said before. Eventually, you'll become more comfortable. Remember, I was the shy kid that wouldn't talk. Now I'm here. So definitely, it can be done. Thank you. And also happy to connect.
Thanks very much, Val. Really interesting. Quite the CV you've got there. We have to be out. Everyone has to be out by 8 o'clock. We've got 15 minutes. So if anyone's got any burning questions, well, we could take one question, I think. If anyone, or thoughts.
That was a lot, I know. Probably.
We'll
take time to process.
There's one over there.
At the back, I think.
I'll take this first. Thank you very much, Val. It was a brilliant presentation, superb. I think anybody at any level could take a lot from it, and I'll definitely be bookmarking this live stream so I can go back and watch it the next time I'm trying to find a job. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I think that was amazing. I just have one question about if you have any framework or template, some kind of thing that can help a new person, for example, joining a organization to apply the system thinking that help them connect the people, the process, and technology.
That's a good question. No, because I didn't develop a framework myself. This is all the knowledge I have in my head, basically. But definitely we can talk, and I can certainly, if you are interested, I can help you develop something. I like doing that, and I not that you mentioned that, I tend to help people entering, and they usually come to me when they know a bit about me, or just that I found a job in UX. Sometimes they come and ask me, and so yeah, I usually tend to have talks and Zoom calls and stuff to explain a few of these things a little bit more in depth. So definitely happy to do that if you want. Yep. Ricky's coming.
Thank you. Super interesting presentation. Thank you so much. Speaking as a designer and someone who, I guess I've experienced over the course of my career a perception of designers and a perception of the value designers can bring to an organization and the organization's goals. Having seen sort of both sides of the coin, what can we do as a design community to try and raise the profile of design and help others understand the value that we can bring to that organization? Because I've seen that try to be tackled so many times and unsuccessfully. So yeah, I'm interested to hear your view.
Well, I definitely don't know that I have the winning formula, but at ESPC, for example, again, being my first UX proper designer job, but also their first UX designer. By the time I left the company, and I was only a year and a few months there, they were telling me, now every time we need to know what to do with a screen, we say, what would Val do? And then they say, well, probably research or testing, and then go out and do it, which is amazing to see. And sometimes I value that more than actually, leaving a product behind. So sometimes you want to influence people in how they approach stuff. And this is very hard to do. I'll try to do some of the things I said here, but to give you maybe a bit more of practical examples. For example, if I have to give a presentation, I try to explain the process, but don't use any design language. I try to tell them, this is what we did, this is how we did it, and this is how we added value. By default, people will understand. And if people know exactly what the project was about or are familiar with it, definitely they know what you do. And if not, you can tell what you do, but just be simple about it. Just explain. Don't use jargon. Don't go overboard with that. When I was interviewing for Royal London, this came up, and they said, how do you go about presenting? And I said, I just don't use jargon. Sometimes, depending on the topic, I might say, and this is, by the way, this is called this. But that's all I would say, because I just want to plant a seed in their head. I know first of all, show them that I know what I'm talking about, but also, make that connection and I'm talking to you about what I could do for you. I'm not talking as a designer, I'm not lecturing you, I don't plan to do that. If you show how you can help the other people all the time and you put yourself in that position, people tend to buy it a lot more. Again, I don't know that I have a winning formula. Do this and you'll get this result. It's not exactly that. It's a bit of a trial and error thing, because you have to see what the tone of the company and the people there, how open they are, how close they are to things. But there's usually people that are open to new ideas. So you find those and you start explaining to those, and they will actually explain to the others. This is what happened at ESPC. I left, and now it's the people that bought the idea selling it to them and convincing the others to do it. Those people that say, what would Val do if she was still here? Those are the people that bought my UX stuff. And now they're trying to implement. And it's good if those people are managers, at least, or middle management. It will be easier, of course, to spread the word. But you just have to be gentle about it. And I would say, try to persuade by, making friends with people, sharing their pain. As I said before, put yourself first on their shoes, understand their constraints. And then you say, I can help you like this. That will create a lot more buy-in for the future than anything else you can explain about design thinking, about wireframes, about research, about anything. Just explain how you would help people from your side as a colleague. Hope that answers a bit.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Val, that was
Good.
super interesting. Thanks to both our speakers tonight. Take care. So we usually try and go down to the Blue Blazer. The last 2 times we've been there, they've not let us in because the group's been too big, and it's a pretty busy time of year, I think, at the moment. So we'll head over across to Lothian Road. We'll head to the Brewdog on Lothian Road. It's nice and big. Hopefully there'll be some space for anyone that wants to continue the discussion. And if you wouldn't mind leaving quite promptly, otherwise I'm going to get my wrist slapped. Thank you very much.
The 3 of you here in front.